Open up your Bibles this morning to the book of 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 22 and 23 is where we're going to pretty much be camped out there this morning. We're going to touch on Matthew 7, just what Chris read for us in just a minute. But most part of our lesson is going to come from 2 Samuel this morning. It's good to see you all here. I appreciate your presence here. We have several visitors with us, some new faces with us. So it's good news that that Jeff had to bring for us this morning, and definitely it's a beautiful, great Lord's Day to be here. Again, I mentioned it Wednesday night, but I appreciate all the calls and the texts and the prayers on my behalf this past week. This Sunday is a much better day than last Sunday for sure, and but I do appreciate all your concern. I will say in times past, when something happens and I have to miss last minute, it just kind of stirs up a dust storm. And I think it's still probably that to some extent, but I think it works probably more efficiently here than anywhere I've ever seen. I appreciate people like James and I think last Sunday Stuart and Al and others that step up as well. But, you know, just kind of last minute to jump in there, but I appreciate it so much. I hate putting somebody in a bind, especially on my account, but it is so comforting to know that you've got so many people here who are talented and are able, and it means a lot. And I think as a congregation, we all need to be thankful for that, to have so many men and women who are talented and can step up and do so many things and fulfill so many roles. And sometimes we just have to be flexible. It might not be our normal thing, but we might have to jump into something and step up to a different thing. And we're actually going to talk about that tonight in the title of the lesson, Flexible Christian. So we hope you'll be back tonight for that. But for this morning, we're going to talk about surviving the spiritual storms of life. I don't know if Eddie, or if not Eddie, but if Freddie rather, if he snuck into my notes this morning and saw what I was preaching about, but that First Storm song that he led us in, right up the alley of where I want to talk about this morning. So we appreciate his efforts in that as well. You know, when we consider the great power of nature and storms, it's easy to be amazed. I've always told Julie, I think to some degree I missed my calling, at least in secular work, because I love weather. I love weather. I love studying it. I love thinking about it. I love looking at it. Unfortunately, it causes me a lot of problems sometimes in my line of work, but I've just always been amazed by the weather. And when you look at the power of the weather and the power of nature, it is just astounding as to what it can do and the effects of it. When you just look at this year, now I don't know who keeps up with this stuff. Somebody's got a lot more time than I do. But in just this year alone, we have had over 24 what is classified as severe weather events. And I'm not talking about just here, I'm talking about all over the United States. And in just those 24 classified weather events, we've had over $56 billion lost in that. Now again, there may be a lot of things factored into that that are kind of bogus, but you think about it, there are a lot of great costs to the weather because of the great damage that it does. Now those things are temporal. Those things are monetary, and those things can be replaced in time. Lives can't. And a lot of lives have been lost as well. But when you think about the power of the wind and the power of the water and the power of these storms, it is just amazing to what they can do. But you know what's amazing? Even more so than that is the great power of our God, who, although those storms are so powerful, as Nahum the prophet says in Nahum 1 and verse 3, the Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. But I want you to notice what it says here. The Lord has His way in the whirlwind and in the storms, and the clouds are the dust of His feet. That shows you how small we are. It shows you how, I hate to say insignificant because we are important to God, but it really, the word is insignificant in as far as how much we compare to the vast nature of what's around us. We're so small and we're so fragile. And yet all these storms can just rip things apart in just a matter of no time and cost billions of dollars worth of money and cost and rebuild. And that's just the dust of God's feet. Isn't that amazing? We serve an awesome, powerful God. Tonight, hopefully in our young children's class, that's one of the songs we're going to sing. I like to sing that every so often. My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. And He really is. But here's what I want you to think about with me this morning as we think about these storms, and then as we contrast that to how much bigger that God is to that. How do we weather the storm? And when I say weather the storm, I want to talk about just for a minute just the physical side of that, okay? How do you and I weather any storm? unfortunately, we're about to go into what we call our secondary severe weather season. When you have these cold fronts coming through and our climate is trying to switch from hot to cold, and you'll have some transition periods there where you can have some pretty stormy weeks. How do we weather those storms? You weather them by two ways. One, you seek shelter, okay? You have a firm foundation or a firm shelter, and you take shelter when that storm is coming in. Anybody with any common sense understands that. It's amazing how many people don't do that, probably myself included sometimes. I'm that guy that's saying, where's it at? Let me see it. And then, of course, you get in trouble. But you seek shelter, right? Secondly, number two, you rely on others. You rely on the warnings, the advisories, the aids of those weathermen and other people. We rely on each other, and we've got to have a firm foundation. It's amazing how close that is when it comes to spiritual things. In fact, it's identical. If we're going to survive the spiritual storms of life, and those spiritual storms are much more dangerous than the physical ones. The physical ones may cause billions of dollars worth of damage and can rip your home off the face of the earth, but it can't take your soul. The spiritual storms can. And when we're trying to weather that spiritual storm of life, how do we get through that? Got to have a firm foundation, and you got to rely on other people. Follow along with me this morning as we venture into those thoughts of the importance of surviving the spiritual storm. Appreciate so much Chris reading for us this morning there in Matthew chapter 7. And I ask you as we begin this lesson, which one are you going to be? Are you going to be the wise man who builds his house on the rock and the storms come and they beat against it and it rains and the waters and blowing and all this stuff and it stands firm because you have a firm foundation? Or are you going to be the foolish person who tries to get through that on your own? Who builds your home and who builds your life and who builds your world, if you will, on shaky, unstable, sandy type things that will only wash literally right out from under you when things get tested. Where are you at in your life today? Are you founded on the rock? Or are you just hoping and crossing your fingers for the best on the sand, knowing all along it's going to crash before it's over? Where are you at today? Let's talk about this firm foundation first. As we look at 2 Samuel chapter 22, and I ask you to have your Bibles marked there. If you don't, let's go back there. 2 Samuel chapter 22, just to give you a little bit of background of what we're dealing with here. This is one of the places where David talks about really the issues in his life and what he's facing. And we know that David lived a very stormy life, if you will. We're talking about King David, okay? He lived a very stormy life. He dealt with a lot of problems and a lot of storms. But he made it. How did he do it? Well, we learned this from 2 Samuel 22 and then also 23. Firm foundation, and he relied on others. We've got to do the same thing if we're going to survive that spiritual storm. But number one, he found strength in God. Chapter 22 is loaded with all the ways that he found strength in God. And we're going to basically break it down into three little smaller points under our main point number one. And that is, God is a rock and God is a fortress. And David was founded on him. When you look there in verse 2, notice what he says. 1 Samuel 22 and in verse 2. And he said, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer." The Hebrew words are very important right here. The word fortress literally means castle. And when you think of a castle, you see some of those castles, you think, usually they're really old. They are. You know why they're old? Because they hadn't been destroyed. It's because they're strong enough, they're built strong enough, the foundation is strong enough that they weather the storm. Castles don't show up on an 18-wheeler with the frames strapped together, okay? And throw it up in 2 days, and then they come in with some sheetrock, and in 2 weeks you're ready to move into this house. I mean, it's not quite that fast, but some of them are thrown up pretty fast, right? And it's like kids, in Limestone County, it's like kids building houses with Lincoln logs. In just a few minutes, you got a house. They're not built very good at times. Some of them are, many of them are not. Castle's not built that way. It takes a long time to build a castle, and they last forever. That's why, because they got a firm foundation. Do we understand that? They have a firm foundation. I want you to think about David's life. When you go back, and we don't have time to go through all the passages this morning, but if you go back and you look at the timeline of his life, for about 8 years, David is running from King Saul. Okay? He is running from King Saul for about 8 years. So in other words, for 8 years, Saul in every way is trying to kill David. And he survives all 8 years. Why? Because he had a castle. And you may say, well, David lived in the strongholds of the wilderness. Absolutely. But he had a castle there. It's amazing how you can move anywhere you want to move and still have a castle. Why? Because God's the fortress. Is God your fortress in life? Do we have that kind of firm foundation? David went through war after war after war in his life. David shed so much blood in war that God wouldn't allow him to build the temple because his hands were so bloody in context. Do you ever record anywhere or remember it being recorded in your memory and in God's Word where David was ever injured? I don't remember one. Now, he had some tough days and he dealt with some tough times, but you tell me when David was ever injured. Why? Why was he safe through all that turmoil? Because he had a castle. He had God as his rock, and he had God as his fortress. I want you to think about Proverbs chapter 10 for a moment. Notice I have the word highlighted there, when. What does it say? When the whirlwind passes by and the wicked is no more, the righteous has an everlasting foundation. There's a very interesting and very important point that needs to be made about one word there. And that is the word when. A lot of times we live our lives on if. Well, if this happens, or if this happens, or if that... We think about if a lot. And you know, a lot of times we can really worry ourselves to death with that. But this passage doesn't say if the storm comes. It says when it comes. Which gives us a guarantee, and it may not be what we want to hear, but it gives us a guarantee that the storm is coming. It's not a matter of if, but when. But you see, it doesn't matter when it comes. Do we get that? It doesn't matter when the storm comes, because if you found it in God, you have an everlasting foundation. It doesn't matter when. It doesn't matter if it's in the middle of the night. It doesn't matter if it's when everything's going good. It doesn't matter when whatever's happening. When it happens, and it's coming, the righteous stand because they have an everlasting foundation. David said, God is my rock, my fortress. God is my castle. God's castle moves with you. Do you have it? We've got to have it to weather the storm. Verse 3, God is a stronghold. 2 Samuel 22 and in verse 3, the God of my strength in whom I will trust, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold and my refuge, you save me from violence. Let's get down to verse 33. Verse 33 of 2 Samuel 22, God is my strength and my power. He makes my way perfect. Think about that. In the King James there it says, God is my high tower, which basically in the Hebrew means an inaccessible place. I just gave you the example just a moment ago of those 8 years of turmoil running from Saul. We didn't even talk about the time that he ran from his son Absalom. And Shimei that cursed him, and others that were just always out to get David. We didn't even mention those. But you know why nobody ever touched David? Nobody ever touched him because they couldn't get to him. And you may say, well, now, hey, wasn't he close enough to Paul or to King Saul to touch him at times? Yeah. I'm not saying that he wasn't close in proximity to danger, but he was inaccessible because God was with him. It was as if God had put a shield around him and nobody could touch him. Because God was his high tower. God was his stronghold. This is really another lesson in and of itself, but when you look at verses 29 through 37, you find 9 different things that led to David's victory. I want to run down through them right quick. I made a list of them, but I encourage you to go back and read that. God, he mentions as being a light and a lamp, number 2. A conquering power. A perfect path. The Lord's presence. Safety and security. Notice verse 34. Number 6. He was sure-footed as a deer. Not only was he agile, but he was fast. He has strength and skill, a shield and a salvation. And the last one that he mentions there, down towards verse 37, he says, he is making my paths wide where I have a good place to step. David wasn't just trying to weave his way through a bunch of things in life where he's just going to trip around every corner. God broadened his path and said, look, here's your place to walk. Isn't that amazing? There's somebody in the strongholds, if you will, somebody hiding out in the wilderness, somebody hiding in a cave, somebody running for years for their lives. Could look at their life and say, I've got a broad path to walk because God paved it for me. And He gave it to me. You know, when you drive these old backcountry roads, what are you typically doing? Doing this and doing this. Why? Because there's potholes everywhere. It doesn't matter how wide the road is, there's just potholes everywhere, and you'll blow out a tire if you're not careful. When I read that passage, I don't see potholes. He had obstacles, yes, but I see a wide path where He says, my steps were made easy. That's a man who's in tune with God's presence. That's a man who had his firm foundation. Somebody who weathered the storm because they found strength in God. I want to ask you, is God your high tower? Do you live your life every day in an inaccessible place to where Satan and the evils can't touch you? That place exists. That castle is God. That stronghold and that high tower is God. The question is, do you have it? If you don't, you're going to spend some sleepless nights. If you don't, you're going to spend a lot of worrisome days because what's protecting you? What's protecting you? Nothing. But with God, there's no worries. There may be some hard days and there may be some stresses, but we know that it's all going to work out together for good. Notice Proverbs 10, verse 21, or verse 29 rather. Proverbs 10, 29. The way of the Lord is strength for the upright, but destruction will come to workers of iniquity. Which one do you want to be, folks? I know which one I want to be, and I believe I know which one you want to be. I don't want to be destroyed. I don't want to have destruction in my life and for me and my family. But I better have God if that wants to be my reality. Psalm 62 and in verse 2, I love this, and we have a song about it as well. He only is my rock and my salvation and my defense. I shall not be moved. Shall not be greatly moved. I have seen, and I'm sure you've witnessed this as well, when these storms blow in, I've seen whole foundations just obliterated. Moved completely to a different location. But not God's people. God's people have a firm foundation no matter where they go. Is God your stronghold? Is God your strength? Is God your shield? Chapter 22 of 2 Samuel, verse 4. Pick up there with me. I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. Those words sound familiar, don't they? Very familiar song. Verse 5, when the waves of death surround me, the floods of ungodliness made me afraid. The sorrows of Sheol surrounded me. The snares of death confronted me. And in my distress I will call upon the Lord and cried out to my God. And notice this, He heard my voice from His temple, and my cry entered His ears. Isn't that an amazing thing? That all this can just, the walls just literally close in life, but we're okay. We're okay because we have God's ear. And He's watching over us. As you look down into verse 31, as for God, His way is perfect. The word of the Lord is proven. He is a shield to all who trust in Him. Here's the thing. David's conditions were awful at times. Very, if you will, unbearable. And the thing about it is, some enemies and some storms are so fierce that really no man can help. Escape seems impossible. Death many times seems inevitable. But in God we find strength. In God everything is okay. And we can make it. For Proverbs 10 and in verse 30 says, the righteous will never be removed. Never be removed. But the wicked will not inhabit the earth. So yes, God needs to be our strength. He needs to be our firm foundation if we're going to weather the storm. That's what chapter 22 is about. As you skip on over into chapter 23, though, you find the rest of the story. And that is, we have to find strength in brethren. You find in chapter 23 a group of the most amazing people that you'll ever read of in Scripture. It's kind of odd how they're mentioned here at the last. But in chapter 23, we see some of David's last words. But as these last words are on his mind, look who is included in the thoughts of this chapter. David's mighty men. There's about 37, give or take, in all. 1 Chronicles 12 and in verse 8 talks about them a little more in depth. But there's some bad dudes, for lack of better words, You don't want to go up against these guys. Okay? And these strong men abandoned themselves to David while he was in distress. So David had that foundation in God, but because he had that foundation in God, he was able to be, let's say, joined together with or accompanied with the people that he needed to help him get through it as well. You see, it's not all about having God in our lives. It's about having the right people in our lives. I've said it before, and I will continue to say it until I'm proven otherwise, which I know won't happen. I would not be standing here today, preaching this lesson, doing this today, if it were not for the people who encouraged me to get here. I wouldn't be who I am today as a husband, as a father, as anything in this life, if it wasn't for the people in my life, guiding me down that right path and picking me up when I didn't have the strength to be picked up myself. Now, God does all that as well, but we need each other. There is a reason that God, through Christ, established the church, because we're not designed to go it alone. So many times we think we can. But even a man after God's own heart, a man who firmly understood what it meant to have a foundation in God, David needed good people. And he found them. Or maybe they found him. Or maybe God sent them to him. Whatever you want to call it. They were in David's life. My friends, we need each other to weather the storm in life. 1 Chronicles 12 and in verse 8 talks about some of these people. Gadites joined themselves to David in the stronghold in the wilderness. They were men of valor. They were trained for battle. They handled the shield. They handled the spear, which means they could play both offense and defense. They could play both sides of the ball. No problem. These guys were in shape. They had faces like lions and they were swift as gazelles. You don't want to mess with them. And David had every one of them on his side. Why? Because he needed it. He needed somebody, just like we're encouraged to do in Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 through 2. He needed good people to help bear the burden that he was having to bear. And you and I need that as well. We need good people, God's people, to help us to bear the burden that we try to carry so much by ourselves. And we fall under the weight, and we crumble under the weight, and we feel the darkness, and we live in all kind of misery, thinking that sooner or later we're going to find enough strength in ourselves to be able to carry it, and we never do. You know why? Because we're not designed to. Let go of that pride. Let go of that stubbornness that says, I can figure this out. Stop doing that. That's undue stress to you on your part. We're not designed to carry the weight. I always point out to people, even Jesus had to have help carrying His cross. So do we. So do we. When are we going to start relying on those that God has placed in our lives to help us? When are we going to continue to do that so we can be stronger and stronger? Galatians 6 verses 1 and 2 says to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Are you doing that in your life? Are you surrounding yourselves with people that'll help you? You're here today, that's a good start for sure, but are we doing that day in and day out? Or are we trying to bear that load? Not wanting to swallow that pride and admit that we need somebody to help us. Friends, we're here for each other. Are we relying on each other the way we need to? I think sometimes, and I understand the concept, and we'll go on to the lesson after this, but I feel like sometimes we think, I just don't want to be a burden on somebody. I don't want to put that on them. They've got more on their plate than they can already deal with. And I've had people, I don't know how many times, tell me that. You've got enough to deal with. Don't worry about me. We shouldn't be saying that. I understand the selflessness in that, and I respect that. But our mentality should not be, well, don't worry about me. You got your own problems. Again, we're not designed to carry it on our own. And your burdens are my burdens. My burdens are yours. And we should not live with the mentality of, well, I don't want somebody to fool with me. I've said that I don't know how many times, and I'm wrong in saying that because we're in this together. And we need to understand that. We're not designed to carry that load alone. Romans 15 and verse 1, we then who are strong are to bear with the scruples of the weak. In other words, we are to be mindful of their weak conscience and things that they're struggling with, their mind and their emotions. Today you're strong, tomorrow you may not be. Saturday you may be enjoying the day, hunting with your son, and everything's well, and you wake up early Sunday morning and you're in the ER. That's what happened last week. No warning. You don't know what the next hour holds. We got to think about that. And when we're on top, when we are strong, or even if we're not the strongest, but if we are able, we need to be bearing with those who are not. Because sooner or later it'll be you. Are we bearing with each other in the way that we need to? And are we allowing others to do that for us? That's really the focus of the lesson, is allowing others to do that. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 3, I love this passage. Remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are also in the body. Now ultimately that's talking to those Christians who were chained, literally. The word chained or the word prisoners there really refers to those who are in bonds. But I want you to think about that word bonds just for a moment. It's not just chains that bind you, is it? Jesus came to this earth to loose what? The bondage of sin through His blood. So we're not only chained by bad mistakes in this life, we're chained ultimately by sin. And notice what it says there. It brings us all into one group. Remember those who are in bondage. Interpret that bondage however you like. But you're chained with them if they're part of you. Help each other. Allow yourself to be helped by other people, because we are in the body together. Together. Remember, we need each other to weather the storm. We need to view each other as being linked together. It doesn't need to be this group, and doesn't need to be that group, and doesn't need to be this little club over here and this little club. We're in this together. And we need to act like it. We need to love each other. We need to serve each other. We need to talk to each other. We need to bear and share the burdens. Are we doing that? If we're going to weather the storm, we're going to have to. Find strength in brethren. Here's the lesson. We're not designed to be able to withstand the weight. I've said that 3 or 4 times already. We are not designed to be able to withstand the weight alone without assistance. When we went to Dauphin Island back several weeks back, a month or so ago, I don't know, time flies, but a while back. There's Addie. Addie's right there, pink. The long-legged kid right there with the hat on, that's her. But that's a picture of inside the batteries or the bunkers or whatever you want to call them there at Fort Gaines there at Dauphin Island. It's an amazing structure when you think about it. Back in 1821, it was completed during the Civil War. I think there was some things added onto it in the Spanish-American War. But when you look at the brickwork there, and I know some of you here would definitely appreciate this, but when you look at the brickwork of that and that late 19th century work, it's just amazing the craftsmanship in it. And it's still standing today. A better picture of it you find here, and that's what this older gentleman who was there, he's pictured right there, that's what he was talking about. And I didn't get to go there that day, but Julie was telling me about it later, and she took some of these pictures. But the reason that it is designed that way is to bear the weight. If it was in a square formation, it wouldn't bear the weight, it'd just crumble. But when it's built in a triangular or a dome-type shape, the weight is distributed from the top, down the sides, and all the way to the bottom. And it stands. Isn't that amazing? I want to point out to you something very important about this picture here. Think about this brick right here, okay? Over here, think about this brick. Think about this brick. Think about these line of bricks. You tell me which brick in that structure is more important than the rest. I'm no brick mason, I'm no bricklayer. There's several here this morning, but are they not all important? Are they not all important to the whole structure? Absolutely. So here's the point. We need God's help, number one, at the top, to only begin to distribute the weight. We've got to have that. First and foremost, we've got to have God at the top to start distributing that weight. He's our foundation ultimately. He's ultimately underneath us, and He's here at the bottom. But as we look up, He is also at the top. That's where it all starts. If you're going to weather the storm outside, you're going to weather, and it's amazing that's on an island, by the way, and it's endured several very destructive hurricanes. But if you're going to weather the storm above and the storm outside, then you're going to have the firm foundation underneath, and beginning at the top, you're going to have to be protected. And as you come down the side, you're going to realize that you have to have each other in order to stabilize what's remaining. The lesson this morning is very simple. As Psalms 28 says, yes, God is our strength and our shield. He is a saving refuge, but it's also about the people together. We need each other. God is our hope to endure the storm. And He will save His people as a whole so long as they stay united and so long as they rely on each other. The lesson's very simple. We need God, we need each other. The question is, will you survive the storm? We have everything we need to survive it. The question is, will we tap into that? Will we allow God to be that foundation? Will we make Him that foundation and allow Him to do what He's here to do for us and Christ for us? And will we rely on each other? Will we surround ourselves with the right people, with God's people to help us through the storm? If we do those two things, there is no hurricane, there is no tornado, there is no spiritual storm of life, you name it, that will destroy us. We will not be moved. Now, if you're the big strong guy that thinks you're tough, or the stubborn individual that says, you know what, I'll do this alone, you're going to be greatly disturbed until eventually you're destroyed. Not just now, but for eternity. And you don't want that. And neither do I. Is God your foundation? Is He the center point of your life? Have you named the name of Christ? Have you repented of your sins? Have you been baptized? Are you a part of the body of Christ? If you're not, you need to be. Because that's where it all starts. That's the foundation that we all need to weather the storm. If you've walked away from that in your life, you need to come back. Because you can't weather the storm without God. And then secondly, are you involved with God's people? Have you surrounded yourself with people who want to get to heaven like you? That'll help you along the way. It takes both. You can't choose which one. You've got to have both to weather the storm. And it's all here for you today. Every day it's here. The question is, are we using it? If there's some changes that you need to make to your life today to make that a reality, we're here to help you in any way. Won't you come while we stand, while we sing?